we are in an early JK with a 5.3 LMG. This JK is pretty simple. It has a bunch of switches and stuff for lights, but it's not a Rubicon. It doesn't have a very tall lift, doesn't have a lot of armor. It's just a good old JK 4-door. And this 5.3 is an excellent engine in this JK. These Gen 4 5.3s are economical, affordable, they have decent power, and I've had one in my personal JK for about 8 years, and it doesn't burn a drop of oil after 150,000 miles. It hauls my kids around with the air conditioning on in the summer here in Vegas. They're good motors. This JK has to do something that most don't. And in some ways it can be more difficult than crossing the Rubicon, more difficult than fording a river, more difficult than going through a desert. This JK has to pass a California emissions test, and we're not afraid of that. This JK has all the emissions equipment, calibration, software, and hardware to pass the California emissions test. Now, it's getting more difficult all around the country as enforcement has stepped up, and California is also changing their rules. They just added some enhancements, like having to have a dealer verify the calibration. As far as the actual test goes, the 3-gas, 2-speed, tailpipe test, tampering. The other part of it is proving the origin of the components, and maybe if I can get under the hood in this, I'll show you some of that. You have to prove that the intake is compliant. So either you got a factory intake or an EO, an executive order. We purchased the exhaust systems right from GM so that we can certify the origin of the exhaust system. Calibrations have to be from GM, as you know, and everything has to be pure. You can't mess around with the monitors or codes, and that's what we do. But still, California is a very forward state. I've been an emissions inspector for 20 years, and I worked in California. So we do the best that we can to get these ready for inspection. We have to get all the monitors down to 0, meaning all the monitors must be set and supported with no trouble codes. So when it does get to that referee, everything works like it's supposed to. The check engine light, the monitors, mode 6 data. If he does a functional test in any of the components, they have to work. So that can be a challenge doing an engine swap versus just trying to do an engine swap that works but does not have to pass an emissions test. A lot of guys are running without converters, running custom or hack tunes, and that's fine, but this vehicle's got to go to California, and it has to be run through a referee, so it is held to a different standard. I've done plenty of videos on these 5.3 Gen 4s. You know all about them, so I don't think I really need to talk too much about it. In a relatively light JK like this, with smaller tires and a low lift, these engines are excellent. They'll run for a long time, hundreds of thousands of miles. They'll run on low-grade fuel. They get good fuel economy. It's just a great combination in the JK. The new Gen 5 motors definitely have some advantages. They also cost more, and they're more advanced. If you got the money and you want to go for a Gen 5, they're awesome engines. Let's talk about where we're going with the swap, since we've covered these 5.3s before. Our swap is really maturing. This Jeep is running our billet AC bracket. We have all new truck billet brackets, which really change up the mechanical portion of our swap. 8 years ago, we started making steel brackets as a hand fabricated component, and while they work good, they required fitting and alignment that these billet brackets don't. These billet brackets are being made by our own machining centers to a very precision standard, so they're just bolt on and you go. So the billet brackets, what do? Well, they mount your stock JK accessories and put them right back where they were. And what that does is it allows us to avoid interferences like the air compressor up against the passenger side frame, the upper control arm against the air compressor, the power steering pup up against the power steering gear when you're running the GM drive, custom hoses on the power steering, custom hoses on the air conditioning, having to change the wire lengths for the alternator to not only for charging but for the field control. So what happens is we put these accessories right back where they were. The AC hoses, the power steering lines, the alternator electrical connections all go back where they were. Really nice setup. This means you can buy parts over the shelf or off the counter rather than having to fabricate or come back to me to get lines. So I'm really excited about it. It's really sped up the hardware portion of our swap. The electrical side of our swap is even taking bigger steps. Most of you know that our Mocan is going into production. We've got many of them on the road right now that we're testing, and I'm hoping by summer we will have fully integrated Mocan into not only our in-house builds but into our kits, so that whether you're in California or Dubai, you can buy our kit and have that CAN interface, which is going to eliminate a lot of hard wiring and other modules. The other side of the Mocan is we're simplifying the electronics to a point that we're not going to have to do any modifications on components like shifters, instrument clusters, and we're going to get better functionality. At the same time, you're not going to have to send us any components for modification. As far as the tuning goes, you're going to get everything in one box, which means you're going to get the hardware, the wiring, and the tools you need software-wise to perform the entire swap without having to send us anything. And that's really exciting for me, because when I started doing this 8 years ago, this swap was complex, and it did require a lot of man hours in hand fabrication and modification. But we're really getting to a point now where you basically throw this GM engine in and plug in a couple of connectors. You're going to hook up a tool and do some software upgrades, and you're done. And if there are upgrades available in the future, you're going to get those via email. You're not going to be sending components back to us. We've tried to engineer this so if the average guy does this build, plugs everything in, bolts everything up according to our instructions, you're going to be successful. We're eliminating all the guesswork. We're eliminating the tapping into things. We're shooting for 100% plug and play. We're eliminating all the guesswork so that you have the highest probability of the swap being successful the first time. Finishing our test drive in this 5.3 California build. This is a Gen 4 LMG iron engine. Great motor. We're in four-wheel drive low right now. As you can see, we're in tap shift, holding it down in second gear because we're going down this trail. This tap shift is awesome off-road. RPM match shifting, full manual control. As you can see here, I'm actually just gonna go back up into an automatic because it works so well. Now these Gen 4s don't have the same level of control as the Gen 5s do with the brake pedal position sensor and some of the autonomous gates, but they do an excellent job. Like you can see here, I'm letting off the gas and it's downshifting. These Gen 4s still have a lot of life left. When I started doing the Gen 3 swaps back in the Gen 4 swaps back in 2007, guys were into the Gen 3s and nobody wanted to mess with the Gen 4. Okay, now I'm riding my brakes. Let's bring her back. I'm going to drop it a gear. Notice the tack came up, power brake me. Now I'm in second gear. So when I started doing these swaps back in 2007 with the Gen 4 engines, everybody was using the Gen 3s and had them pretty much figured out. And with variable valve timing, intake valve tuning, air fuel management, the Gen 4s were evolutionary. The Gen 5s are bordering evolutionary and revolutionary in my opinion, because with the continuous VVT, direct injection, high compression, they've made more than an incremental improvement. And after driving them in the long term and then getting back into a Gen 4, you definitely notice the difference. That's not to say these Gen 4s aren't a phenomenal engine. I have a Gen 4 in my own Jeep, and even compared to anything else out there, I still think, whether you're talking other V8s, superchargers, turbochargers, and let me say something, superchargers and turbochargers put a lot of horsepower up. There are a couple of issues. Their torque curves aren't as flat as a V8. They tend to be more peaky. Drivability isn't the same as a V8. With these Gen 5 motors, we're finding almost full torque from just off idle to the red line, and it's just enormous. That means you can rip the tires loose off the line and pull hard right up to the red line. So while you're not putting out the peak horsepower of even some of the supercharged Pentstars, you're putting that torque out over such a broad RPM range that in the end you win. Keep an eye out for some new interesting Gen 5 technology that we're going to be incorporating into the JK, and I'm really excited about it. I don't want to say a whole lot about it until it comes around, because you know how that goes. You get busy doing something else and you never get around to it. But just know that there's a lot of exciting things going on at the shop. Between the billet brackets, and yes, we are doing the billet brackets for the LS3. We're going to be cutting those out hopefully next week. We're going to be doing a billet AC bracket for the Gen 5 engine. This drive is just about done. We do have a couple of very exciting builds coming up. We've got a Gen 5 double throwdown, really nice JK. It's an early JK that we're going to be doing a video on. You might even be able to meet the owner on that test drive, because he's a local. We got two more Gen 5. One's an 8-speed, one's a 6-speed, going in high-end chassis. One is a Evo double throwdown, and the other is a 2 Tony at GenRight Elites chassis. Really nice builds. So we're going to be doing a couple of videos on those, so stay tuned.